After 8 years of fertility treatments that drained our savings and my body, my husband handed our marriage counselor an envelope and announced he wanted out, not because the IVF had failed again, but because his paralegal was already 4 months pregnant with his child. He thought leaving me in a roadside motel with $300 would break me for good. He never imagined that the quiet, weathered handyman fixing the motel's pipes down the hall was actually the man who'd built half the commercial real estate in the county under a name nobody recognized, or that within a year I'd be carrying his twins while his lawyers dismantled my ex-husband's entire firm piece by piece. My name doesn't matter as much as what happened to me, but I'll tell you anyway. I'm Naomi, 34, and for most of my adult life I worked as a hospital administrator in Charlotte, North Carolina, the kind of job where you learn to keep your face calm no matter what's happening behind it. I'm going to need that skill for what I'm about to tell you. The night it ended started in Dr. Calloway's office, the fertility specialist we'd been seeing for 2 years straight, 6 years total if you counted the first clinic in Raleigh before we moved. I was sitting in the small upholstered chair across from his desk, my hands folded in my lap the way you fold your hands when you're trying to look stronger than you feel. My husband, Garrett. No, that's not right. I need to stop using that name. It's a name I associate with someone else now. My husband's name was Holt Bradshaw, 37 years old, a managing partner at a regional law firm, the kind of man who wore his cufflinks even on weekends because he liked the way they caught the light in photographs. We'd just gotten the results from the third round of IVF, negative, again. Dr. Calloway was gentle about it, the way doctors learn to be gentle when they've delivered this particular kind of bad news 100 times before. He suggested we take a break, maybe explore other options, maybe consider that the embryos themselves weren't the problem. Holt didn't say anything in the office. He waited until we were in the parking garage, until the elevator doors closed behind us, and then he turned to me with an expression I hadn't seen since the day his father died. Flat, distant, already somewhere else. I can't do this anymore, Naomi. I told him I understood, that I felt the same exhaustion, that maybe we both needed a break from the treatments for a while. That's not what I mean. He loosened his tie like the conversation itself was suffocating him. I mean, I can't do this marriage anymore. I've been seeing someone, Priya. She works in our litigation department. She's pregnant, Naomi, 4 months. I found out the same week as your last transfer. I want to tell you I screamed, that I threw something, that I did all the things you imagine you'd do in that moment. I didn't. I just stood there in the gray concrete garage with the smell of exhaust in the air, watching my husband explain very calmly, very much like he was closing a deposition, that he'd already spoken to a colleague about the divorce filing and that he wanted to handle this with dignity. Dignity. That was the word he used. What followed over the next 6 weeks was a masterclass in cruelty dressed up as efficiency. Holt moved out of our house in Myers Park within 10 days, a house I'd helped pick the wallpaper for, helped plant the dogwoods in the front yard, a house that was on paper entirely his because 7 years ago, fresh out of grad school and naive about money, in the particular way you are when you're 27, and in love, I'd signed a prenuptial agreement that protected everything he brought into the marriage and almost nothing I would build during it. His mother, Vivian, came by the house on a Tuesday afternoon while I was at work, using the spare key she still had, and helped herself, as she put it later, to several pieces of jewelry that had belonged to Holt's grandmother. Pieces I'd been wearing for years, pieces I'd assumed, foolishly, were mine now too. She left a note on the kitchen counter. These belong to the Bradshaw family. I'm sure you understand. I did not understand, but I understood that I had no recourse because none of it had ever legally been mine. The final blow came on a Thursday in November, 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, when I came home from a 12-hour shift to find a moving truck in the driveway and 2 men I didn't recognize carrying my belongings, not Holt's, mine, out to the curb in black trash bags. Holt stood on the porch with his arms crossed, Priya's name lighting up his phone screen every few minutes, and told me the house officially closed escrow that morning. He'd sold it, without telling me, because legally, he didn't have to. You have until tonight, he said. I already paid for a week at a motel off Route 29. Consider it generous. I want you to understand something about me before I go further. I am not a woman who begs. I didn't beg that night either. I packed what I could fit into my Honda Civic, clothes, my late mother's quilt, a box of framed photographs that no longer meant what they used to, and I drove to the motel he'd booked, a low brick building called the Pinehurst Inn with a flickering vacancy sign and a parking lot that smelled like rain on asphalt. The room was small and smelled like old carpet cleaner. I sat on the edge of the bed that first night and didn't cry, not because I was strong, but because I think the part of me that knew how to cry had simply gone quiet, the way a smoke detector goes quiet once the battery dies. I just sat there listening to the pipes groan in the walls, watching the orange glow of the parking lot lights through the thin curtains. That's how I met Caleb. He knocked on my door the second morning, toolbox in hand, explaining that the front desk had sent him to fix a leak in the bathroom one room over, and he needed access to the shared pipe behind my wall. He was maybe 40, broad-shouldered, with the kind of quiet, unhurried way of moving that some men have when they've spent their whole lives doing physical work and have nothing left to prove. His hands were rough. His flannel shirt had a tear at the elbow that looked patched more than once. "Sorry to bother you," he said. "Shouldn't take more than 20 minutes. I told him it was fine, that I had nowhere to be, which felt strange to admit out loud for the first time. He worked quietly while I sat at the small table by the window pretending to read a magazine I'd found in the drawer, and somewhere around the 15-minute mark, without looking up from the pipe wrench, he asked if I was okay. Nobody had asked me that in 6 weeks. Not really. Not in a way that wanted an honest answer. I told him more than I meant to, about the IVF, about Holt, about Priya and the house and the trash bags on the curb. He listened the way some people are just naturally built to listen, without interrupting, without trying to fix it, just nodding occasionally and tightening a fitting with his wrench. "For what it's worth," he said when he finished, wiping his hands on a rag. "The people who treat you like trash usually do it because they know, somewhere down deep, that you're worth more than they are." It wasn't poetry, it wasn't the kind of line you'd put on a greeting card. But it was the first true thing anyone had said to me in weeks, and something in my chest loosened just slightly. His name was Caleb Whitfield. He did maintenance work around 3 or 4 properties in the area, he told me, mostly plumbing and general repairs. He lived alone in a cabin about 20 minutes outside town, had been divorced once a long time ago, no kids. He didn't talk much about himself beyond that, and at the time I didn't think to ask why a man who fixed pipes for a living drove a truck that, now that I think back on it, was a little too new, a little too clean for the job. Over the following weeks, while I sorted through what remained of my old life, finding a lawyer, going through what the prenup did and didn't allow, applying for jobs in a different part of the state because I couldn't stomach the thought of running into Holt and Priya at the grocery store, Caleb kept showing up, not in a way that felt like pursuit, more like a man who happened to have reasons to be nearby. He'd bring me coffee from the gas station because the motel's coffee maker was broken. He fixed the heater in my room without being asked. Once, when my car wouldn't start in the cold, he drove 45 minutes out of his way to bring jumper cables before his first job of the day. I didn't fall for him quickly. I want to be honest about that, because I think the audience watching stories like mine sometimes expects love to arrive like lightning, but it didn't. It arrived like weather, slow, gradual, the kind of thing you don't notice changing until you look up one day and the whole sky is different. We started having dinner together most evenings, nothing fancy, sometimes just sandwiches at the little diner 2 blocks from the motel. He asked about my work at the hospital and actually remembered the details the next time we talked. He never once asked me for anything. He never made me feel like my situation, broke, recently abandoned, technically still married, was a burden or a red flag. He just kept showing up steady as the seasons. It was almost 4 months before I learned who Caleb Whitfield actually was. I'd taken a part-time job at a diner near the motel just to have some income while my divorce dragged through the courts. Holt's lawyers were drawing it out, hoping I'd run out of money before I ran out of patience, which, to be fair, was working. One evening, a man in an expensive overcoat came in asking the owner, Marlene, if she knew where to find Mr. Whitfield because there was a zoning issue on one of his properties that needed signing off that week. Marlene, refilling coffee cups, said, "You mean Caleb? He's probably out at the cabin. You know how he is, doesn't like coming into town more than he has to." The man frowned, confused. "No, I mean Caleb Whitfield, the owner, Whitfield Holdings. I remember setting down the coffee pot a little too hard." I asked Marlene about it later, trying to sound casual, and she laughed like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "Honey, Caleb owns half the strip malls and apartment complexes between here and Greensboro. inherited the company from his daddy, grew it into something bigger than anybody expected. He just likes fixing things himself, says it keeps him honest, she shrugged. Rich men get bored, I guess. He's been doing the maintenance rounds himself for years. Most folks around here don't even put it together. I confronted him about it that same night, in the cracked parking lot of the Pinehurst Inn, my arms crossed against the cold. He didn't deny it. He just looked a little embarrassed, like I'd caught him in something more intimate than a lie. I should have told you, he said. For the first time in a long time, somebody was talking to me like I was just a guy with a wrench. Not Whitfield Holdings, not an opportunity, just me. I didn't want to lose that. I understood that more than he probably realized. I'd spent 7 years being Holt's wife, a role with rules and expectations attached, and for 4 months with Caleb, I'd just been Naomi. It seemed only fair that he'd wanted the same thing for himself. I won't pretend the months after that were simple. There was a part of me, raw from everything Holt had done, that wondered if I was about to repeat the same mistake, falling for a man with money and resources, handing over a piece of myself I might not get back. But Caleb was patient in a way Holt had never been. He never rushed the divorce proceedings along by throwing money at my lawyer, even though he easily could have. He let me handle it on my own time, only stepping in once, quietly, to make sure Holt's firm couldn't bury me in delay motions designed purely to exhaust my legal fund. When I finally asked him to help with that, he didn't lecture me about taking too long to ask. He just made one phone call, and somehow, within a week, Holt's lawyers stopped stalling. It was almost a year after that night in the parking garage in Charlotte that the divorce was finalized, and another 7 months after that, before Caleb and I got married, quietly at a small chapel outside town, with Marlene from the diner as my witness and his cousin Wren as his. By then, I'd already started feeling unwell in the mornings in a way I recognized but didn't dare trust. We went to a specialist together, not Dr. Calloway. I never wanted to see that man's gentle, apologetic face again, but a new fertility doctor, Caleb, had researched himself in Asheville, 2 hours away. I remember sitting in the waiting room, my hands shaking, certain the news would be the same as it always was. It wasn't. I was already 11 weeks along, twins. The doctor said something about how sometimes the body needs an entirely different set of circumstances. Less cortisol, less chronic stress, an entirely different hormonal environment, before things that seemed impossible become possible. I don't know if that's exactly true, medically speaking, but I know that for 6 years with Holt, my body had felt like it was constantly bracing for impact, and in 4 months with Caleb, for the first time since I was 27, it had felt like it could finally rest. Word travels in small towns and in cities too when there's money involved. Holt found out I was pregnant with twins roughly the same way I assume most people in his position find things out, through a mutual acquaintance who couldn't resist mentioning it at a dinner party. I heard secondhand that he went very quiet for the rest of the evening. He found out who Caleb actually was about 2 months after that when Whitfield Holdings, completely unrelated to me as far as I knew, quietly acquired a controlling stake in a commercial development firm that held a substantial portion of debt tied to Holt's law firm's office lease. I want to be clear, Caleb never told me he did that on purpose. When I asked him directly, he just said, "Business is business, Naomi. I don't go looking for trouble, but I also don't walk away from a good deal just because of who's standing on the other side of it." I believed him, mostly. I think there was probably a small, satisfied part of him that didn't mind how it worked out. Holt's firm restructured within 8 months. I heard he left the partnership not long after, that things between him and Priya didn't survive the financial strain the way either of them had expected. Funny how easily love evaporates once the comfortable life underneath it disappears. His mother, Vivienne, sent me a card when the twins were born. I never opened it. Some doors, once they're closed, are better left that way. I gave birth on a Tuesday in early spring, 2 healthy children, a boy and a girl. And Caleb cried in the hospital room in a way I don't think he expected to. This big, quiet man who fixed pipes for a living, holding 2 impossibly small humans like they were the most fragile, valuable things he'd ever carried. Sometimes I think about that first night at the Pinehurst Inn, sitting on the edge of that sagging mattress, certain that my life as I knew it was over. In a way, it was. But I've learned that the life that ends and the life that begins are sometimes standing right next to each other, close enough to touch, and you don't always know which one you're walking into until you're already there. I spent 6 years thinking something was broken in me. It turned out the only thing broken was the life I was trying to force myself to fit into. Some people will only ever see you as small enough to abandon in a snowstorm or a parking lot, or a motel room with $300 to your name. They will never understand what it means when someone else looks at that same broke, exhausted woman and decides, quietly, without needing credit for it, that she was worth building an entire life around.